Greg, welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
It's good to be here, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, look, my absolute pleasure. As I just sort of mentioning off air a second ago, I'm been really excited about having you on this show. It's we're going to talk about your firm, SBI, or Sales Benchmark Index, which was a management consulting firm, professional services firm, which, as you know, we run a professional services firm in Exit Advisory Group. So to hear another entrepreneur's story who's kind of been down at least a similar path and made a great success of it is very exciting to me. And I know many of our audience will be looking forward to hearing your story as well. I don't want to jump too far ahead here because many of our guests may not have heard you. Greg, would you mind maybe just kicking off and give us a little bit of your background and what led you to starting SBI?
Okay, very good. So again, my name is Greg Alexander. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. I graduated at the University of Massachusetts, and upon graduation, I took a job with a tech company called EMC. When I joined EMC, it was a very young firm. I got lucky. I went to work for the right firm at the right time, and through the 90s, we grew like crazy. And I rose up through the sales ranks. And then after the dot-com bubble burst and the world kind of reconfigured itself, I went back and got my MBA from Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was there that we developed the idea for this consulting firm called Sales Benchmark Index, or more easily said, SBI. And the idea was pretty simple. It was to apply the science of benchmarking to the art of sales, which this was back in 2006 when the world was just discovering the cloud and data analytics and AI and big data, et cetera. So we timed that correctly. I had that firm for 11 years. I sold it at the end of 2017. And that's taken me to what I'm doing now, which is two things. So first is I'm the founder of a mastermind community called Collective 54. And it's a mastermind community dedicated to founders of boutique professional services firms. So think consultants, IT service providers, marketing agencies, people that kind of market and sell their expertise. And then secondly, I am the chief investment officer for my family office, which is called Capital 54. And there I'm investing the proceeds harvested from EMC and the sale of SBI directly into promising boutique professional services firms. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, very cool, very cool. And thanks for sharing that. So I want to pick on something in a second because you talked about timing, and I'm really curious about this concept of when we come to market and what we're sort of delivering in the broader environment. But can you tell us a little bit more about SBI before we get to that? So sales benchmarking. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So a lot of our clients were trying to figure out how they could grow their revenue, in particular, faster than the industry and their direct competitors. And the types of industries we served, for example, the software industry, private equity, et cetera, they were spending a lot of money on their sales team. Sometimes it was 20, 30, even 40% of top line revenue. So optimizing that spend, getting more return per dollar was something that was top of mind. So the things that we did for them is we figured out which products they should sell to which customers through which channels. We figured out how much sales capacity they should have in terms of how many salespeople, how to deploy them into sales territories, how to pay them and give them quotas, how to train them, all that kind of stuff. So it was a management consulting business at its core, meaning it was arms and legs, as you might think, and it was mostly projects. But our specialty was on business-to-business sales effectiveness.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess it's in my experience, and I've seen a lot of professional services firms over the years. I found so many of them end up starting their business, or the founder starts the business, usually because they're good at something, right? Maybe whether they're an architect or they're whatever it might be, they're sort of good at something, and then they decide at some point for whatever reason to go out on their own and they start a firm because they're good at that particular service. And I think, and I'm going to keep things really super simple here, but when I look at most firms, you've got how do you generate your revenue, which is your marketing and the entire sales function, and then you've got to deliver on that sale and obviously do what you were meant to do to get paid, right? And yeah, there's finance, legal, and all this sort of stuff that sits around it, but generating sales, delivering on sales are these sort of two core buckets that I see so many businesses, all businesses need to do, but I just find so many consulting firms or professional service firms are great at that delivery piece because that's what they're good at, and have absolutely no idea about sales and marketing. And so, and I think that's such a key element as to why many of them perhaps don't scale to where they need to go. And so, that's why I love what you were doing with SBI. I mean, I think it clearly complements that missing gap for so many people out there.
If I could add to that, at Collective 54, we believe in the life cycle of a professional services firm. In our opinion, it's about 15 years in total, cradle to grave. And there's 3 stages, 5 years in each stage. The first stage is grow, the second stage is scale, and the third stage is exit. And what you just said there usually happens when somebody's leaving the growth stage and entering the scale stage. And what happens there is that, like you said, somebody's really good at something, or maybe a group of a team, and they hang their shingle and they grow for a period of time, primarily through their own personal network. They generate referrals and word of mouth, and that's good enough in the early days. And it gets them to a certain revenue level. It starts to pay the bills. It makes them feel comfortable that they don't have to go to work for a corporation and take a real job, and they can kind of do this thing. But then growth plateaus, because at some point, your personal network is finite by definition. So now you have to expand beyond your personal network, and you have to be able to attract clients and people who don't know you, and people who might not even be in the market for your service. So there you have to build a proper commercial sales and marketing engine that's repeatable. And that's a big step to go from that growth stage to the scale stage. And that's the kind of thing that we help boutiques with.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So I come back to my question about timing, because I think history is sort of littered with examples of really great ideas that perhaps came to market just at the wrong time. I'm just curious to sort of unpack that with you a little bit. You mentioned the timing of what you were doing. Can you just talk us through your perspective around that and how it's impacted your business?
So I'm going to give you 3 timing examples, and it's going to make the point that luck plays a huge role in everybody's success. And I might be one of the luckiest guys you ever met. And after you hear these 3 examples, you'll know why. So the first example was I went to work for EMC, a data storage company, 3 years before the internet launched. We made the world's greatest data storage device at a time when the amount of information being generated exploded. So talk about being in the right place at the right time. I mean, it was like walking around with a bucket catching rain that was falling from the sky. And the timing there was perfect. And I would love to tell you that was some master plan, but I was a recent graduate from university, and I got plucked off the campus and just got lucky, right? So that was the first thing. But what I learned from that was how important timing is. So the second time, when I started SBI, so this would be the next journey in my career, I gave this some thought. And I said to myself, okay, so the software industry is a growth industry of our nation. I'm in the United States, and it will be for the next 10 to 20 years. And the business model of the software industry is 2 big expenses. There's the engineering expense to build the product, and then there's the sales expense to sell the product. So anybody that's doing something in those 2 areas is going to do well. Well, I quickly removed engineering because I'm not an engineer and I can't code. But I was born and raised in a fantastic sales organization, and I had some knowledge there, so I drew a circle around that. And then I said to myself, working backwards from the problem, what is the problem? And the problem was there was no data at the time. If I could ask you, how's your sales force doing? And you might say it's doing pretty good, and it was a gut instinct. You were comparing yourself to yourself over time. But then I would say, well, put yourself in the context of your competitors in your industry, externally how you're doing, and nobody knew. They couldn't answer the question. So we went to work on solving that problem because everybody wanted to know that. And any improvement there, because the spend was so large, would fall directly to the bottom line and make a company infinitely more profitable and therefore more valuable. So we timed that because we were expecting the software industry to grow exponentially as we moved to the cloud. And that was going to be the wind in our sails, so to speak, to ride the wave here. So that was the second example. And what I'm doing right now is the third example, and probably my most deliberate and intentional attempt, is that I believe that COVID, and we started in 2020, has changed the world forever. I mean, here you and I are talking halfway around the world with each other. And there's this industry called the membership community or mastermind business. And there's several examples of successful firms in that space. For example, you might have heard of YPO or Vistage or EO. And all these companies are 75 years old. And they're still based on the local geographic chapter. They're not digital. And I said, well, it's time for digital transformation to hit that industry. And we can create a better version of that by leveraging digital tools and doing away with the geographic limitations and make this truly a digital empowered global community. And that's what we're doing at Collective 54. And we're growing very, very quickly because of that one thesis, that that's a great business, membership businesses, community businesses. However, it can be even better if we take it out of a legacy 75-year-old structure and put it online. And that's basically what we're doing.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's and I know exactly what you mean. I think we've all been around long enough to see those type of mastermind groups. And you're right, they are a very effective model, and there's a lot to be learned from your peers, and there's a lot to be learned from working in a group and having some structure around it. So, but you're right. I mean, these days we all expect to be online, right?
Yep.
And it's funny, I've found over the last even last year or so, how we're almost developing this additional language, right, around whether it be some of the little glitchy tech things that we now deal with on a daily basis that were kind of an anomaly in the past. And yeah, it's just this evolution that's happened so quick. It's almost a revolution, right? Like it's not been a slow thing. It just came overnight. So yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
And the pandemic has changed us forever. I mean, before the pandemic, which I know seems like a million years ago, but there was a belief that if you worked from home, you wouldn't be as productive. But now the data's in and you're actually more productive, right? So the things that were standing in the way of these mastermind communities going online and becoming digital are now gone. So timing again, right? So, and another stroke of luck. I mean, I hate to say the pandemic was a lucky break because it was a horrible thing. But in the context of business, that was the enabler. Mm-hmm. That was the turning point for that industry to be digitally disrupted.
Yeah. Look, and I agree with you about the pandemic. I mean, I think we can all acknowledge the hardships that it's caused. And, we went out for dinner the other night and I was looking around at all the restaurants that have closed down. I've never been one who's been interested in hospitality businesses because I could never see me running one. And, it's just not the sort of business I'm interested in. But geez, I feel for the families, these people that have lost their earnings, lost their family business. It is terrible. I am interested, though, the flip side of that, of course, is businesses like yours, and I've seen plenty of others, people in the e-com space, of course, is another great example where their business has really accelerated through this period. And, we've seen some massive growth. We've seen, as you said, I think, there's been a fundamental shift in society because of this. Is there other ways, I mean, other than joining groups like Collective 54 to sort of help business owners on their journey, are there other ways that you see, particularly professional services companies, being able to take advantage of the changes that have happened?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you some real examples. And I just had this call with somebody today. So I spoke to a consultant today who lives in Costa Rica. And he moved to Costa Rica from Austin, Texas. And I said to him, what are you doing in Costa Rica and why are you living in Costa Rica? There's no clients in Costa Rica. And he's like, it doesn't matter anymore. I can live here and live my life the way I want to live and still serve my clients. And he goes, and Greg, here's the best thing about it. He used to have to be on site with the client. So every project came with a travel budget. It was typically around 15% of the project fee. So let's say you charge $100,000 for a project or whatever. The customer's got to eat another $15K for travel expenses. Well, now they don't. And what they're doing, instead of pocketing those travel dollars, they're actually spending more on consulting. So he now no longer has to suffer the life of a consultant where he left on Sunday night and came home Thursday night. And he's been able to move to a destination that's a dream destination for him. So his quality of life went up and his business is going up because the clients are spending more with him because they don't have to waste money on inefficient dollars like plane tickets and hotel rooms. So it's transforming the entire professional services industry. Here's another example. I have an accounting member, and they tech automated and offshored all their labor. So that they were now able to bring fractional CFO services that were only affordable to mid-sized companies, and they're now able to bring them to small companies because they were able to lower their cost to sell through technology and leveraging a global workforce to lower their price point. And when they lowered their price point, their demand exploded. So those are two examples of how this new, global world we're living in is changing the professional services industry in remarkable and forever ways.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I think that whole issue of offshoring. I mean, gosh, we could do an entire another show on that. It's such an interesting topic, and I think the concept that you couldn't do it because of whether it be language barriers or time differences and all that sort of stuff. I think like the video conferencing question, a lot of those problems have melted away quite quickly. So yeah, it's been an interesting one. Let me wind back a little bit here to SBI because you obviously sold out of that business and did so very successfully, and I'd love to kind of unpack your journey a little bit through SBI, and you talked about three stages for professional services companies a moment ago, and I imagine that your journey probably followed something like that. So can you just talk us through what it looked like? I mean, you started off in 2006. Tell us about the journey.
Sure. Yeah, so much like many of your listeners, I would imagine, I started in 2006, and every 2 weeks I was reminded how dumb I was, and I was learning on the job. And during that time period, we were stumbling through things like, who really is our ideal client? What problems are they having that we're uniquely qualified to serve? What might they be willing to pay for our services? We were figuring out all of these things. How should we deliver those services? Should everything be a custom snowflake type project, or could there be some standardization? So we were working through all of those things. We were hiring our first set of employees. We made several hiring mistakes. We learned, who we should be hiring. We started to establish a culture. And all that happened in kind of like the first, I'd say, 5 years or so. Then in the second 5 years, things took off. And we were dealing with an entirely different set of challenges, and they were caused primarily by rapid growth. I think during that time period, the firm went up like 8 times or something like that. It was a straight curve. And the biggest challenge there and the biggest change amongst many was we were gaining a reputation, so we were attracting a more sophisticated client. Big brand name clients with huge projects. So their expectations for what quality service really was, we had to rise to that occasion. And so we started doing things like training our employees differently, hiring a different type of person, scoping our work differently, using a different set of tools, et cetera. And I'd call that kind of the scale stage. Because what happens during that time period is eventually the 70-hour work week has to end. You can't get there anymore through brute force. You can in the early days, but at a certain size, you just run into a wall. So you got to go through the scale stage. And then our exit stage was quick. We sold the company in a year, which was unusual. It usually takes much longer than that, but we got lucky there in the sense that we ended up selling to private equity. And private equity was about a third to 50% of our client base. So because we had been serving them, we knew a lot about what they were looking for. And several of them had said to us, hey, Greg, if you ever decide to sell the firm, you should give us a call. We would be interested, right? So that truncated a lot of the process. And so we went through an exit process that lasted, the full process was about 9 months, but there was like 3 months of getting ready ahead of time. So it took about a year to go through that.
Yeah. And frankly, look, I find that's quite common. I'm always sort of saying to our clients when they're going, well, when they're telling us they're ready to start a sale process, I always say to them, give us a year. It might happen a little bit quicker, it might happen a little bit longer, but if you're not planning for at least a year in your head, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. So, So come back to that first 5 years. Did you start the company with any other business partners, or were you on your own?
I did. No, I had 2 co-founders. One of them was my classmate at Georgia Tech, where we developed the idea. And then we launched, and about 6 months later, when we got a little traction, one of my old workmates from my time at EMC joined us. and we were kind of the three musketeers. And the way we kind of divided up the labor, so to speak, is I was the rainmaker. I brought in the clients. One of my co-founders would deliver the work when it was ready to be delivered. And then the other co-founder was working on new service offerings so that we could expand kind of, what we were doing and who we were serving. And then over time, as we grew, kind of like functional organizations were stood up on those three pillars, if you will. And then, of course, we added in, the back office, which we largely outsourced, finance, IT, legal, HR, that kind of thing. But yeah, that's how we got off the ground with those three people.
Yeah, interesting. And from how long did it take to go from sort of standing still, starting point to the point where you were actually generating enough revenue and at least covering bills and, not going backwards?
Yeah. So we were cash flow positive, I'd say, within the first 90 days. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about consulting companies is, they're not capital intensive.
Yeah.
They're inexpensive to run, so you can get cash flow positive. But I will say, the three of us did not take a paycheck for 3 years.
Yep.
And we wanted to put all the money back into the business because we had decided from inception that we weren't interested in building a lifestyle business. We decided to go on this journey together as partners in every sense of the word because we wanted to build an asset that somebody else may want to buy and have a wealth creating generational moment. So we were prudent. We went without a lot, and it was painful to do that, but luckily it worked out for us.
Yeah, and this idea of actually foregoing immediate kind of consumption and all these sort of benefits, it's this constant reminder, right? Like if you want to build something amazing, you got to invest in it. That it's, there's very rarely anyway, is there any such thing as an overnight success. So it's, I'm taking comfort here that my story somewhat resembles yours still. So, no, that's cool. And do you remember your first employee after the three of you?
Oh, for sure. He's the CEO of the firm now.
Yeah, right.
He took over for me when I sold it. His name is Matt Shares. And he was our first employee, although we were at that time we were calling ourselves employee 1, 2, and 3. So technically he was employee 4. And I'll never forget the moment when we decided to hire him. We were on a snowmobiling trip in Colorado, and we were driving around in these big machines, and it was freezing cold, and we went inside for a beer. And we had this chance to hire this remarkable person, and he is a remarkable person, but he needed money. I mean, he had to support his family, and we had to pay him, and we had a heated debate, and it was tough to agree to pay an employee before we were paying ourselves.
Yeah.
But that was a moment of truth for us. We were tested to see, is this real? And we had the courage to do it. I give my partners a lot of credit. And that individual coming into the firm changed the firm a lot.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's I think it can be a bit of a scary step putting on those first people, but certainly in my experience, every time we've put on somebody, and okay, we've had one or two little sort of misses where they've not been quite the right fit, but in most cases it's not. In most cases it's been a really good fit, and invariably when we put the right person in, good things happen. I don't think we've ever looked back and gone, geez, that person was amazing, but I regret hiring them.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what happened with us. In fact, what happened is that he had so much success that people from his previous company saw the success and decided to join him. So he was a force multiplier for us. His arrival, and a band of Indians followed him into the firm after that. And it worked out really well. That accelerated our scale. Yeah,
nice. Can you talk to me about your experience with SBI and I guess any experience generally? But I've found with so many of the clients we've worked with that there seems to be these kind of natural barriers or ceilings, hurdles, whatever you like to call them, when people are on this growth journey. And I think people sort of define them slightly differently, but probably one common denominator there is often revenue. And I'll give you an example. I've had some particularly professional services firms say, hey, we had to push really, really hard to get to 1 to 2 million in revenue. And then once we got past that, there was this spurt of growth. And, I guess, as I say, those barriers might be different for different firms and different industries. But did you experience anything like that? And can you kind of give us any sort of insights into them?
We did, for sure. And my opinion is it's not money related, it's time related. And what I mean by that is I think every founder is a remarkable person who tends to produce a lot. But again, there's only so many hours in the week. So even as optimized and productive you are as a founder, there's only one of you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to work Christmas Day. You can't work 24 hours a day. There's just a finite amount of hours. And what happens is that in the early days, you work a ton and then you get to a certain revenue amount. And then you say, want to go beyond that. And then you get smarter in how you work. And then that's an optimization exercise on yourself. But at some point, you need to replicate yourself in others. And that's the big inflection point. Can other people in the firm do what you can do as well as you can do it? And there's a lot of founders that can't make that transition. Their identity is wrapped up in the firm and they want to be the hero. And instead of hiring equals that can do what they can do as good as they can do it, they hire a bunch of helpers. And then the founder tries to grow up and be the hero with 50 helpers running around, or these days, the hero with a bunch of bots. And that doesn't work because those people can't do what you can do as well as you can do it. So therefore, you can't continuously delegate because as the firm is growing, the founder is growing in his or her capability, and he's moving up the value stack, so to speak. So what he spends an hour on today, a year from now, he won't spend an hour on that because it's no longer valuable. Somebody else can do it. He needs to be on the frontier, pursuing the long-term vision. And if the founder suffers from under-delegation, he or she kills themselves because they can't scale. So that is the thing. And I don't think it's a dollar amount. It's a time thing. Now, when on the calendar does that happen, I think is situational. But eventually, the founder or co-founders are tapped out.
Yeah.
And they've got to figure out the delegation.
Yeah. Yes. Great bit of wisdom there. It's I know one of the things that we talk a lot about succession. Once again, Exit Advisory Group, right, is the firm, our core business. But it's we get a lot of people, particularly in the professional services sector, that come to us and say, how do we make this shift, right? Like, how do we, and I've seen it whether it's architects, engineers, even accountants, whatever it might be. They've got, whether it's just themselves or like in your case, you had a couple of partners who they're all top performers, all experts in what they're doing. But so often I hear people say, how do we bring people up to this, what I will broadly call the sort of principal level, where they can kind of punch the way we punch, they can deliver the way we deliver or make it rain, do those core functions. And of course, what a lot of them miss then too is even if they find somebody they can bring up to principal level, they need to backfill that for that person. And so this idea of succession, right? It's not just never about ending. That's right. It's never ending. It just keeps going. And the bigger you get, the bigger that issue gets. So do you have any sort of insights, wisdom, tips on things that people can think about as they're looking at that problem?
Yeah, I have a few. So the first thing I would advise your listeners to is that in the U.S., there's 1.5 million professional services firms. And out of that, 4,116 of them have reached scale. Scale defined as more than 250 people, okay? That's 1/4%, okay? I mean, it's a staggering number. When you look at that 1/4% and you ask yourself the question, what are they doing differently than the rest of us? And there's a few things they do differently. First is they have a talent pipeline. And it's based on the old pyramid where you hire in juniors and over time through deliberate employee development, you move them up the ladder, so to speak. It's called the upper out pyramid. And you either move up the organization or you move out of the organization. What you can't do is stay still because you're clogging the supply chain. Yep. There's someone coming in behind you, right? So they have this masterful grow your own upper out pyramid in place. So I suggest anyone in professional services who wants to scale, they have to have that version. They have to have their version of that. With the mistake they try to get to is they say, well, boy, that takes too long. But to your point, I argue that it takes a decade to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
So, right. So what really is too long? Because the alternative is to hire mercenaries, which are people that are already high up the pyramid, and you buy them and you bring them in. The problem with that is if you entice those people with compensation, eventually they're going to leave you as well because they're for sale. Another firm, a bigger firm, is going to come to them and say, come do what you're doing for your firm over here and I'll pay you 50% more. So then those firms have high turnover and you can't scale when that's the case. So putting in this upper out pyramid and a talent supply chain is priority number one. Priority number two is to truly understand how you do what you do. Because if you're going to have this talent pipeline, that means you've got to develop your people. So by understanding your job at the task level and separating each task into two buckets, things that can be taught and things that rely on God-given talent. And there's some things that rely on God-given talent that you can't teach. And for those items, you're going to hire to that spec.
Yep. Can you give us an example of those God-given talents?
I can tell with you right now. So you're a personable guy. Within 5 minutes, you're likable. You can't teach that. It's just who you are. It's in your DNA. And we probably have met people that within 5 minutes, they're like a cold fish. You just can't warm up to it, right? So, and that's no matter how hard you want to teach them, you're just not going to be able to teach it. So that's a God-given ability. Now, and there's a few of those. However, for the most part, we all learn things. I mean, that's the great thing about being human. The things I know today, I didn't know 5 years ago. I learned them. Someone taught me how to do them. So if I understand the job, the work to be done at the task level, and I know it's teachable, then I can come up with a employee development program and actually teach those skills. And if I do those two things, if I lay the task analysis, if you will, on top of the talent pipeline, I now go from knowing what to do, the upper out pyramid, to how to do it, which is the task analysis. So that would be my advice. Yeah,
very good. Very good. It's, I think we all keep hearing so much about systemizing your business. And it's funny, I we're talking systems and processes actually with a client, and the client turned to me and said, Simon, what's the difference in your head between the difference between a system and a process? And I guess the best way I had of explaining it was that it's a little bit like baking a cake. You can look at the ingredients of a cake, and that's part of it. But if you don't have the method and how to use those ingredients and when to apply them, I guarantee you're going to produce something pretty ugly. And so the system brings it all together.
Yeah, that's a really good metaphor, right? I mean, I could give you a list of ingredients and say, bake the cake. But if I don't tell you that you need 3/4 of sugar and 5/4 of vanilla, put the oven at 350 degrees, I've got no system to turn those ingredients into the cake.
Yeah, exactly right. And so it's interesting. I think we're all. It's almost this kind of catchphrase now. People saying you got to systemize. But I do think there's a disconnect between all of the rhetoric that we hear out there from all the so-called gurus and the actual business owners who are kind of trying to do everything and also do this thing they call systemize their business. And so, do you have any sort of thoughts or suggestions, or how did you guys go about it?
So what I would say there is that scaling a boutique professional services firm is too much work for one person.
Yeah.
It just is, right? So to do this, you've got to think long and hard about division of labor. And you almost think about your firm as a value chain, not to get academic on you, but your client is paying you X amount of money to solve a problem. And then if you work backwards from that, what are all the things you're going to do, the activities you're going to engage in that deliver that value to the client? And if you can segment those activities out, you now got logical division of labor. So you're not asking one person to be great at 5 things. You're asking maybe a team of 5, each to be good at one thing. That's the systemization of the business, in my view. And I think sometimes, again, back to the hero firm, that concept, founders are, supremely confident in their ability, and they think they can do everything. And the reality is they can for a while, but then the law of numbers kicks in. Again, there's only so many hours in a day, so division of labor becomes the essential scaling activity.
Yeah, yeah. And I might add one little thing I found, not just with my clients, but even with myself, running and building a business. I think one of the things, we've all heard this expression that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right? And so I keep saying to my clients, like, what part of what you do you love the most, right? And which parts do you hate? What parts really suck? Because that's the stuff you need to give to someone else, right? Not only will you grow, you actually might have more fun.
Yeah. It's funny. I recently somebody shared that with me recently, and I never really thought about it. And I said, well, how do you know? So I started keeping a journal. And as my day evolves, I make a note of the things that give me energy and the things that detract energy. Like, I find this conversation very engaging, right? So when we get off the call, I'll write that down. Interviewing on podcasts was something I enjoy doing. So the next time I get a request like this, I'll accept it because it gives me energy. Earlier in the day, I was going through the financial statements with my accountant, and I absolutely hated every minute of it.
No offense to the accountant, he's no doubt they're a lovely person.
Right. So that's an activity that's one of my team members should do. Someone who enjoys that is better at that, etc. Again, back to the division of labor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to SBI for a second, and so. You've started this firm with a couple of buddies from college. You've obviously got some pretty quick success here. You're starting to grow. You hit this scale phase. I could see that you've run the business for, I don't know, roughly, let's call it 12 years. At what point in that journey did you guys start having this conversation of, I know you were build a saleable asset, but when did you start having discussions about exit?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story because I never thought that we would be able to sell the business to a private equity investor. Up until that point, that was very rare. And the reason why that was rare is most private equity people buy companies with debt. And professional services businesses don't have any assets, so banks aren't willing to loan.
Yep.
But what ended up happening is the world of private debt emerged. And private equity firms were raising money. They weren't banks. And they were willing to lend into these situations for higher interest rates. So that opened up a whole new pool of buyers. Okay. So, and many of these private equity investors were our clients. They would hire us to go to work with their portfolio companies. So one of my partners, who was responsible for our private equity practice, were over dinner one night and said, hey, I keep getting asked the question, when are you guys going to go to market? There's an opportunity here to take some chips off the table. And I said, well, tell me about it and all that. And I decided not to do it because I didn't want the disruption. Then what happened, but the seed got planted in my brain then.
Yeah.
Then what happened was we tried to buy a company in our space, adjacent to our space. And we bid through the investment banker. And the banker called me and said, hey, you guys lost. And you lost to XYZ company. And I said, how far off were we? And we bid I think it was like $24 million. And the winning bid was $67 million.
Wow.
I mean, I wasn't even close.
Yeah.
So I said to the banker, if you can get $67 million for that firm, what can you get for mine? Right? And he threw out a number of $150 million.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, let's giddy up and let's give this a shot. Now, I still didn't think, because as you know, a lot of deals you go to market and they don't close.
Yeah.
Right? I had never been through diligence. I didn't even know what diligence was. My personal life was interwoven with the company's finances. I mean, we were a mess in every way, shape. I didn't have audited financials, nothing that you ever need. But this banker was willing to do the work. So God bless him. We hired him, and he went to work, and we did the QOE, and he cleaned up all the stuff and did the SIM and got us out there. And again, back to timing. Maybe this is my fourth example of being lucky. There was this massive amount of money sitting in these private equity firms, and there wasn't a lot of deals.
Yeah.
There was more money than there was companies to buy.
And
So we had all.
and if I can just jump on that for a second, because it's a question I get a lot from business owners thinking of selling, is they'll always say, Simon, when's the best time for us to sell? And I'm always like, man, that's simple. The best time to sell is when there's more buyers than there are sellers. It's
Right.
a supply demand, right? Like if there's lots of money out there looking for a home, well, whether you're kind of 100% ready or not is almost irrelevant. You need to think about,
That's exactly right.
the market. So anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. And it's still, I mean, here it is 5 years later, and it's probably even a better time to sell now than it was then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a seller's market for sure. So anyway, so we go through that process and we start getting indications of interest. And then we progress to the LOI, we go through the diligence, and we ended up closing. So that's kind of how it happened. So the two things that got me thinking about it was my partner, who I trusted, who was managing the private equity group, was suggesting exactly your point. Like the odds are in our favor right now. And then I actually saw one of my competitors get taken out for a number that blew me away.
Yeah.
And that pushed me into the market.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So let's get a sense of context here. So when all this sort of started unfolding, can you give us an idea of how big the firm was in terms of, say, revenue, employees, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So we were doing 30 million in revenue. We had 16 million in EBITDA, but we only had 30 employees.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So we, and this was the thing that got us, we ended up selling the firm for 162 million, which for a 30-person consulting firm is a huge number.
Yeah.
In fact, my banker, I have no way of validating this, but my banker said it's still the largest exit of its kind that's ever happened. So why did that happen? Well, the reason why that happened is we were so incredibly profitable.
Yeah.
And a PE shop wanted that 16 million in EBITDA. And the other thing that separated us, I think, and maybe probably the most unique thing about the deal, is that I told the banker that I was only willing to sell if I got all the money up front with no earnout.
Nice.
And he basically said that's impossible. It's never going to happen. Blah blah blah. Right? And I said you're probably right, but he was able to pull that off. And I left the day of closing and didn't have to stick around for the earnout.
Wow.
And that was a unique thing. And the reason why I brought that up is that the management team that was sticking around, particularly this one individual, Matt Shares, was so good because we had done such a great job with this talent supply chain concept. And he was employee 4 and made it all the way up through the ranks to CEO and was still a young man. He was in his early 40s. So that the investors said, boy, this guy's got a lot of runway in front of him. We had only scratched the surface in terms of the addressable market. So there was a huge market opportunity, a great management team, phenomenal growth in financials and margins that we were very attractive. So that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Congratulations. I mean, what an amazing journey. It's 10 times EBITDA, and it's funny. One of the things we're seeing, we're representing a number of SaaS companies at the moment, and I think, and I've said this on this show many times, that there's lots of different ways people might value a company, but the most common is still a multiple of their adjusted EBITDA. However, we are seeing this shift with a lot of software companies now starting to sell on multiples of recurring revenue.
Yeah.
And sure, there are lots of ways to slice and dice that. I've seen SaaS companies that, 50% of their revenue is recurring, 50% of it is kind of consulting that kind of gets people into the SaaS model. And so, they get this multiple of revenue. Maybe it's a different multiple for the different portions or different buckets of revenue, but it's still multiples of revenue. And I found this really fascinating because it drives this question for me around how does the buyer actually take that business and start to get real returns on it? Because, if you didn't fundamentally scale that very quickly, man, like it's just this asset that you've paid a lot of money for. And so I don't know if you've got any thoughts or insights around that. I mean, or whether that went through your head at the time, but I just find it fascinating.
So when I sold, that very rarely happened, but it's happening all the time now. In fact, one of the reasons why I decided to get back into business and go into the mastermind community space in particular is because these firms trade on a multiple of revenue. In fact, there was one called Chief, which is a membership community for female executives. They just sold for 17.5 times revenue.
Oh, my goodness.
Right? Which is just an absolutely crazy number, right? So what's happening in the SaaS space in particular is because there's so much capital, and capital formation has been strong for so long, that investors are willing to deal with losses for many, many, many years. So they pay up like that, and they're willing to hang in there while these companies run in the red for a long time.
Yeah.
Because they know that at any given time, they can switch their focus from revenue to profitability. And because it's recurring revenue, and particularly in SaaS, which is very high, very sticky with very high switching costs, they could generate an enormous amount of profit right away if they wanted to. I personally think we're on the cusp of that change coming, because I think what happens in a rising interest rate environment is people start focusing on how much debt's on a balance sheet. Can they service the debt? Maybe profitability is more important than revenue growth. People start thinking about those things. So the pendulum might swing backwards here a little bit towards EBITDA, but I don't know though, because there's so much money out there and there's so much competition.
Yeah.
They might keep going with it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's a big change.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I once again, you talk about interest rates, and I think the Fed's obviously in the papers a lot at the moment. Our Reserve Bank just literally put up interest rates 2 days ago, not by much. I mean, it was a quarter of a basis point, but it's not a lot going on here. But at some point in these movements, sentiment starts to shift, right? And I always sort of keep saying to my clients, like, I think you've got another good 12 months run at this, and after that, I can't predict, because we're not going to know that shift has happened until it's actually happened. It's not, the shift is coming in 6 months. We just don't know that. And one day we're all going to wake up and go, do you know, I just feel like the vibe of the market's changed. And sure, there might be some indicators, but, you don't know until things start tightening up and investment decisions start changing. And
I agree.
Yeah.
In my advice to our members in Collective 54 is, don't get greedy.
Yeah.
Ask yourself 2 questions. What's the business worth to you? And what's the business worth?
Yeah.
And when someone's willing to pay you more than what the business is worth to you, sell it.
Yeah.
If it's worth more to you to keep the business, then don't sell it. But that's the big distinction. What's it worth in the open market, and what's it worth to you? And make a decision based on that. And many of the things that you were just talking about, Simon, are outside of our control. I mean, kind of the macro environment we can't control, right? So what the entrepreneur can control is build a great business that's attractive.
Yeah.
And great businesses are always going to get bought. And that should be our day-to-day focus.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's, I once again, and you probably, you may have found the same thing, speaking to so many business owners, that I think there needs to be a shift in the conversation and the thinking for a lot of business owners. My experience, and we've been running Exit Advisory now for, about 6 years. And I still find that there's business owners out there who think the term exit is almost like a dirty word. It's like almost a betrayal of their business. And it's, and I keep saying to them that, our business actually exists because fundamentally we all exit our business one day, whether we like it or not.
Right.
And so, everyone says death and taxes. Well, I'm going to say for business owners, it's exiting your business as well, right? So if you know this is going to happen, surely you want to put some thinking behind this and try to maximize the opportunity. And it's, I think by what you're doing with Collective 54, and certainly what we're trying to do at Exit Advisory and on this podcast is try to shift that conversation a little bit and get people get out ahead of this issue, right? Get up the curve, find out what you need to find out, and start having to use the runway you've got to make the most of your opportunity.
I agree. And if you exit correctly, and that's the big determining factor. There's a lot of bad exits. If you exit correctly, it's a net positive for everybody.
Yeah.
It's a net positive for the founder. Your longtime loyal employees have a life-changing event. The new owners invest capital into your business, and you grow, which makes you be able to serve your clients even better. You create more jobs. when the exit's done right, it's nothing but a positive for everybody.
Yeah.
And listen, everything has a start, middle, and end.
Yeah.
I mean, everything does, right? So you can control the end and make sure that it's in a positive end, or you can just sweep it under the rug and hope it never happens. But to your point, it's going to happen at some point, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Greg, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you here, and honestly, I think I could talk to you all day. God forbid if we actually had a beer in our hands, just we'd we'd probably never get off the call. But look, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and just so many insights here. I just know that this is going to be a huge episode. I'm really looking forward to getting it out. Super grateful. So appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Simon. It was my pleasure.